Hey, welcome to part 3 of the RPE video series. So now we're moving on to finding what is best practice. So after comparing all of these, we'd been running an RPE based model for quite some time, and we knew we needed to refine a little bit further. We're just finding people weren't maximizing, particularly the early weeks of their program. Maybe they get into week 4 or 5 and they really kind of get into that zone of the lift that they should be making. So we took some steps and all right, how do we systemize this and make it the best we can? So the goal of any systemized approach is to remove the possibility of human error as much as possible. The functionality that we needed an objective weight prescription to create as little wasted sets and or weeks in the program as possible. So rather than coming in and guessing for 3 weeks and slowly waking our way up, we wanted to know roughly where we needed to start and be able to have that pretty much bang on from week 1. A subjective variable which would allow the client to auto-regulate session to session, allowing them to outperform an algorithm if progress permits, or to display data of under recovery to prompt further investigation. So we talked about this in the comparison. It was really important to us and the people that we work with to make sure we had this ability for the client to train to a level of failure or a level of fatigue, that we wanted, rather than external factors being the reason why they were over fatigued or under fatigued during that session compared to like a normal day for them. The ability to use rep and reserve as a method of microcycle load periodization. So we periodize RIR over our mesocycles to allow kind of little peaks and troughs within a program to prevent or push back maybe deloads and make them a little less frequent. So the skeleton. So where we actually came across James Krieger, who's at Weightology, released a review of quantifying hypertrophic reps and hypertrophic volume load, which gave us heaps of tools actually to plug into systems we were already using and really expand it. So there's 3 specific ways that he did that. So the Brzezinski equation, which is a method to predict 1RM. Once we kind of investigated this method's shown to be effective in the literature, and for the estimation of 1RM in the bench press. We knew it was like, okay, this is going to give us a pretty good outcome in terms of predicting 1RMs when we need to do that if we want to use a percentage-based model. Then he'd actually taken this model and refined the equation to include considerations for prescribed rep and reserve. So that was huge for us. So basically what we were able to do is not only say, okay, if you can do 100 kilos for 2 reps, you should be able to do 80 kilos for 6 reps, but I want you to do it with 2 rep in reserve. So it's actually going to be 52.5. That's not actually the equation. I just made those numbers up. But that's the kind of outcome that we were able to achieve with this type of formula. So thanks, Mr. Krieger. The hypertrophic reps concept added more validity to the RIR and RPE periodization model presented by Mike Isfertel and Chaz Wedley-Smith in the specific principles to strength training, which is a great book if you want to check out diving into programming a little bit more. So what we saw in there was like working within that 4 to 0 rep in reserve range seems to be the most effective zone for both strength and hypertrophy outcomes. Typically what we're seeing now is that that's actually going to be variant based on the intensity. So a higher intensity lift, so something that's closer to your 1RM, maybe further down that rep and reserve chart, so a 4, and then something that is lower intensity like a maybe 8 reps on a leg extension can actually be taken a lot further closer to failure and cause less systemic fatigue, allow you to still make progress. Excuse me. So if we were looking for the ability to have a prescribed load. We've explained that, right? So this was the formula that we came up with. Well, we didn't come up with. We borrowed from James Krieger. So we had previous load times what you can see there. So a variable previous reps minus prescribed reps plus previous rep in reserve minus prescribed rep in reserve plus 1. So that allowed us basically to put in those numbers and come out with a prescribed load based on the sets, the reps that we'd set and the prescribed rep in reserve. What this kind of raised for us though, we needed to have a previous load, reps, and rep in reserve to actually consider to create this. So there were 3 different methods of predicting 1RM as well. So all methods returned significantly different predictions, thus concluding it was kind of inaccurate. So even though that study showed with the bench press it was quite accurate, we could see that different variations show different outcomes. So we knew that there was going to be a little bit of inside that formula anyway. So this having the rep in reserve auto-regulation element to it was going to be really important, not even considering the individual variances that are going to come with predicting a 5 rep off of a 2 rep max or something along those lines. So the setup, we needed to create a previous load, rep, and RII standard. So we decided upon 2 options. One was a testing week. We chose to apply a 1 rep in reserve to minimize and balance fatigue levels where possible, decrease risk of injury. Week 1 being a new mesocycle means new movements, so we didn't want to be stupid and go to complete failure here and smoke someone before they even started the program. There was 2 things that actually happened in going through that process though. 1, it adhered to the principles of a deload. The testing week, we were able to just say, all right, I want you to take this exercise to a 1 rep in reserve, find out what that load is based on whatever reps that we've set it at, and that's going to predict your weight for later on. That meant they did less total working sets for that week, but the intensity was still kept really high. It was perfect for a traditional deload. 2, it provided an introductory week to the program. So think about skill acquisition, figuring things out in your gym, maybe building a little bit of skill and proficiency in the movement, maybe some confidence in playing around with like machine setups or getting things right for you in that week. So come week 1 of the actual program, you're ready to drop the hammer. The next option was you needing to skip the testing week and allow the lifter to find the prescribed rep in reserve in week 1 of the mesocycle. We were aware that this meant we were going to sacrifice a week of progress, but we're doing that maybe with a testing week anyway, where we're going to achieve at least maintenance and some skill acquisition. This was really vital when it came to short turnarounds for competitions, people that had specific goals that were timeline dependent, that we didn't have time to spend on a testing week. They were new, maybe the testing week wasn't really going to work for them. Just giving them 5 sets to learn something was going to be okay. So we gave ourselves the option to add and remove that testing week when required. Allowing for error. So as we mentioned, no algorithm is ever going to be perfect, and no lifters will ever have the same performance capacity. And in fact, an individual lifter's performance capacity is going to vary every micro, meso, block, and beyond. So the same person is probably going to be a different lifter Monday compared to next Monday, depending on their activities and their lifestyle over the weekend. The method was then set up to allow for such events. A lifter would have a prescribed rep in reserve and a predicted weight and an actual rep in reserve. The first working set with the predicted weight, and then comparing their subjective rep in reserve to the prescribed rep in reserve, and adjust the weight accordingly, repeating for all sets. So I will show you what this looks like in a second. The client would then enter their actual rep in reserve based on the hardest or the heaviest set. The data would then be used to predict the following week's load using the new prescribed rep in reserve. So here's how that worked in practice. So Jim has a 5x5 at a rep in reserve of 4, predicted to be 100 kilos based on what we saw in his testing week. Jim performs set 1 and 2 at 100 kilos. Maybe does the first one, he's like, maybe I'm just a little bit clunky, or maybe it's going to get more difficult as I progress. The sides are at a 5 RIR after doing 2 sets. It then goes, I'm pretty confident, I'm going to jump straight to 110. Bit of a mistake, actually failed a 2 rep in reserve, so we've overshot that adjustment a little bit too much. Backs it off to 105 for the 4th set, feels confident to 4 RIR, and then does the next set there. He enters his actual rep in reserve and 2 as 2 based on his heaviest set or top set, as you'll see in our calculator. Next week, the prescribed 3 rep in reserve results in a prescription of 107.5 kilos. To confirm this method, the accuracy, we can see what happens if we did the math based off the 105 at a 4 RIR. Turns out the prediction was 10. So the prediction for the 3 rep and reserve is actually 107, rounded up to 107.5. And then the prediction for the 105 at a 4 rep and reserve is a 108, rounding down to 107.5 kilos, not using tiny little plates. So they actually end up exactly the same in both scenarios, showing us that this method is going to be pretty accurate in most cases. So this is what it looks like in our spreadsheet. So testing week, did 3 reps with 1 rep in reserve at 115. Predicted 1RM was 125.5. This week he's got 5x5 with a 4 rep in reserve. You can see the 2 variations there, whether he jumped straight to 105 or going through the top set model. You can see the top set differences there in the green column, actual rep and reserve update, and then where it landed for week 2. So going into the case study, we took this model and applied it to 15 competitors that we had in the APU Melbourne Open in 2020. Of those competitors, 10 of them were debuts, 5 were returning. We had 7 all-time PTs and 8 sanctioned meet PTs. We had 25 all-time PBs and 17 sanctioned meet lift PBs. We went 125 from 135 lifts. We had 4 gold medals, 2, not 12, silver medals, 4 bronze medals. Every single one of our clients qualified for the States. We had 9 national level totals and 1 international level total as well. So the outcomes were really, really good. Paying specific attention to the rep and reserve strategy, we noticed the following positives. Weekly prescriptions of the top set were accurate 95% of the time. Weekly management for the coach was focused more on the athlete and less on trying to figure out numbers all the time. We're able to have better communications, get the psychology of the client right, rather than stressing about what they were going to lift all the time. Accuracy was consistently good through the hypertrophy, hybrid, and strength phases, so we taper those down. Due to time restraints and a mixture of using and not using testing weeks was implemented. We had some guys that only had a 9-week turnaround, and one girl actually only did a 6-week prep for this meet, who was one of the silver medals. So we often use top sets and higher rep ranges in previous phases to predict, which still proved to be effective. So like we took an 8 from the previous phase and plugged it in, and then that gave us our starting point for maybe the 5 or the 3. The cons we noticed, we were all in the peaking phase. Everything before that actually ran really, really seamlessly. But when it came to peaking and trying to hit heavy singles, we found some errors that we needed to maybe look at from a coaching standpoint, and the hands-on element of being a coach became much more important. So lifts more often than not needed to be visually seen, discussed, and then prescribed for the following week. It wasn't enough to just kind of go, yeah, the rep and reserve says I should be able to do this, so let's send it. We noticed the more experienced lifter, the less often this actually happens. So this might lead into like just skill proficiency, confidence. I think confidence was one of the biggest ones. As you saw, we had 10 debut. So that confidence to get under a weight that they'd never lifted before was quite a challenge in that peaking block. Discussion with coach was still required. Rep and reserve must be examined during warm-up sets. That's a really important thing to communicate. If you've got a rep and reserve prescribed of 1 and you hit your last warm-up and it's already a RIR of 1, you're not going to get an RIR of 1 of the next weight up. So just being aware of where that's at and having that communicated and with the client. The data allowed us to build a profile of the physical characteristics of the lifter, but also build a profile of their personal tendencies in application. This allowed us to modify prescriptions and or re-educate the lifter for our next prep. So there's a few important things to remember. As with all things in fitness, particularly true for programming, there's many valid methods. What's most important is to have a deeper understanding of the principles, allowing you to be fluid and educated with any method that you use. The above discussed approach will be our baseline systemized method. However, it's not cut and dry. Adjustments and refinements will need to be made for individuals and individual circumstances. In future videos, we'll go deeper into programming principles, including volume landmarks, considerations for intensity, proximity to failure, and exercise execution. So remember, lift smart, lift hard, lift long, A lot of data just came out through this last section in this last video. If you want to try applying this method, what I recommend is actually you go to medium.com/STCfit, open up this article where you can visually read and see it, write it down, have a play with it, maybe use it yourself before you give it to any clients, see how you find the method over a couple of mesocycles, and then give us some feedback. We'd love to hear the people are applying this and what they found and what they adjusted to make it work for them. We think we've found a pretty good balance between using percentages and rep and reserve, allowing for deliberate prescription and also auto-regulation, and the two melding together quite well. As always, find me at Ben Scott STC. Give us some feedback on this, and don't forget to follow at STCfit and at STCfit_learning, particularly for you coaches out there. We'd love to hear from you. Podcast STCfit as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're pretty much everywhere. Have a great day. Thank you.